Hello, my name is Mary Dunn. I'm a Division I student athlete at Youngstown State University. Throughout my entire life, athletics have played a large role. I have had various coaches in various sports. During this time, I learned that communication definitely affects the way that players perform. It affects them as a person as well as a player. For this reason, when I was looking for a topic for my senior project, I really wanted to go into this communication between coaches and athletes. My project is Coaches' Communication Style Changing the Game: Aggression versus Immediacy's Effect on the Coach-Athlete Relationship and Player Performance. To begin, I want to go over what we're going to discuss. I already talked about the introduction and why this information is important to me, as well as what I'm looking to get from this study. Then there's a review of literature. I will go over some of the research that I had done, as well as an understanding of what immediacy behaviors are and aggressive style of communication. I will then go into the two hypotheses I created. Next, I will look at the methodology, which includes the sample as well as what was done. Then the results, which are the major findings. Next will be the discussion, which will be interpretations of these major findings, as well as further research that could come about and some limitations. And finally, the conclusion. So when looking at the literature review, it's very important that I separated these two into immediacy and aggressive. When looking at immediacy, some people might confuse this with immediate communication, however they are not the same. Immediacy is that people stay around what they like and they avoid what they don't like. This can be seen in a coach-athlete relationship because if a coach is sparking conversation that interests the athlete, they are more likely to come back. This is very easily done when a coach will go outside of the sport for communication instead of just thoroughly talking about, just business. So when looking at the literature review, I first want to apologize if I say anyone's names wrong, but I want to begin with Rocca and colleagues of the 1998 study, which found there is a positive relationship between immediacy and responsiveness, meaning that the more immediacy behaviors of communication the coaches allocate, the more likely the players are to respond in a positive light, therefore a positive relationship. This goes into the Terman 2008 study. This study was actually initially done to see the similarities between the teacher-student relationship and the coach-athlete relationship. They did find various similarities, and they also found that immediacy is influenced through two-way communication in open relationships, similar to that of the teacher-student relationship, although it has its own different sides. All the information that I found on immediacy did seem to be positive in regards to how it will relate to the coach-athlete relationship. Next, after looking at immediacy, I looked at the aggressive communication. Aggressive communication's definition is assailing another person to bring forth psychological aggravation. An example of this could be yelling, however, it's not limited to yelling. You don't have to be a loud coach to be aggressive. It can be through nonverbal or verbal ways of disapproval. Casting and Infante's 1998 study, it tried to expand on previous research of the child-parent relationship. Child-parent relationship had showed that more aggressive communication brought about more negative relationships. This was also true in their study. Coaches were considered less credible and less favorable, as well as low levels of sportsmanship and satisfaction from athletes when their coaches consisted of mostly aggressive communication, therefore seeing more of a negative relationship between aggressive communication and the relationship between coaches and athletes. So after completing this research, I was able to come up with two hypotheses. There will be a positive relationship between coaches' immediacy behaviors and coach-athlete relationship and team performance is hypothesis 1, and there will be a negative relationship between increased coaches' aggressive communication and coach-athlete relationship and team performance is hypothesis 2. From these hypotheses, I went into creating my project. First, this began with the sample. The sample, I used all female student athletes that were currently on a team. This was unlike any other study I had found because most of them were former athletes and there was usually a mixture of males and females or just males. All of the athletes were from a mid-major Division I university. Participation was voluntary and it was a convenient sample. There were 16 participants. I had initially looked to have 20, however, due to the COVID-19 outbreak and the remote learning that the university had changed to, it was only possible to get 16 participants. After figuring out the sample, I then went into the methodology. This was qualitative research. It was important to note it was qualitative because all of the research I had done previously was on quantitative research on similar topics. This consisted of phone interviews that were 10 to 15 minutes long, one per student athlete, and they had questions. The questions were separated into 4 sections. The first were 4 objective questions that were very simple and personal. Then the more subjective questions came about. There was 3 on aggressive, 4 on immediacy, and 5 dealing with relationship and team performance. There is a tab under my paper, there is the appendix that shows the full list of questions. So after I completed these questions, I then did transcripts of the audio recordings because while I was doing the interviews, I did audio recordings as well as taking notes. Finally, from these transcriptions, I was able to analyze the data. When I analyzed the data, I separated these into various themes. Once I was able to separate them into aggressive, immediacy, and neither, I was able to really find connections and themes that were able to reach to our hypotheses. It is important to mention that the two athletes that were considered neither, their information was not used in evaluating the hypotheses because I did not feel that they were interpreting the results exactly correctly, and they didn't really have an impact in this situation. Their information is still included in the transcripts, however. So the results. After completing the project, I found that hypothesis 1 was accepted. There's a positive relationship between immediacy behaviors and the coach-athlete relationship and team performance. I found this relationship after finding common themes between the positive impact that immediacy had on some. Various student-athletes highlighted that they felt that their coach was bringing out the best in them. They felt there was a positive relationship between coaches and the players. They also felt that their coach would be less successful on another team. Their team would be less successful with another coach. It is important to realize that in this situation, team performance is a subjective term. This does not have anything to do with how they're actually performing based on a record or win or loss percentage, but more of how the individual rates their team to be reaching their potential and their coach affecting that. So it seems very clear across the board that immediacy did have a positive impact. In regard to hypothesis 2, it was also accepted that there is a negative relationship between aggressive behaviors and the coach-athlete relationship and team performance. These were also very similar in the fact that many people that said that their coach was aggressive felt that their coach did not have a good relationship with them. There was not much personal. They felt as though their coach was usually not justified in what they were doing and was not open to two-way communication. I want to leave the results section on this to you. As one girl said, he has a lot of knowledge of the game. It's just the way he coaches. End quote. This girl really did mention that her coach has, everything he needs, except the way he's communicating is affecting how they have a relationship and how their team is performing, which I think is very important to recognize. So here you can see the graphs that help you to visualize these relationships. So when you look at coaches' immediacy communication, it's obvious that there's a higher positive communication than negative in regards to the coach-athlete relationship. And although it's slightly smaller, the positive team performance and the negative team performance, positive is higher. I think this goes into the fact that some people knew that they liked their coach, they thought they had a great coach, but their team still wasn't reaching their full potential. On the other hand, when you look at the coach's aggressive communication, it is extremely obvious that there is much higher negative. There was 0 positive coach-athlete relationship and 0 positive team performance. This just shows that it was very unanimous across the board. They did not feel that when the coaches were being aggressive that it was having a positive effect. After looking at the results, we find the discussion. The two major findings. There's a positive relationship between the coach-athlete relationship and team performance with immediacy behaviors, and there's a negative relationship between coach-athlete relationship and team performance. When looking at the limitations, it's definitely the limited sample size of aggressive communication. When I initially did this project, I did not know that there was going to be such a larger percentage of people identifying their coach as an immediacy-style communication user. I think this does bring about some liability and generalizability. It might take away from it a little bit. However, these results do still seem to be valid because of the fact that it was unanimous across the board. There were only 3 individuals versus 11 with immediacy. There were only 3 that identified their coach as aggressive. However, they all felt they had a negative relationship, and they all felt that there was negative team performance. Additionally, there was a limit to 2 players from each team, therefore it's not just from the same team. For further research, I think we could use this information that I had studied here and go about with the data that is already collected, because there were questions that I asked in the interviews that I did not use in the evaluation, such as what year you were, what your status was being a bench player, starter, role player, or how long you've been under your coach. I think that those factors don't only affect how a coach communicates to someone, but also how someone interprets they get communicated to. So in conclusion, ideally, you will understand this whole research that I started with the introduction. I went into literature review. I went through the methodology after I explained the hypotheses, and then I explained those results that we found, the major findings. I explained in the discussion how we got these major findings and how we interpreted them, the limitations, and further research. But really, these results would be best in the hands of a coach who is looking to improve the benefits of their coaching style, the athletes, the team, and the entire sport. And most importantly, this information opens the vast doors to further exploration of the most effective way and the most effective tools that coaches can utilize to really get top performance of their players, because that's what all coaches are trying to do. They're trying to win and be successful. Here is my references, and thank you all for listening and watching.